Welcome to your deep dive on economics. Looks like we're tackling this big topic of economics, and we've got a YouTube transcript titled Economics for Beginners and Dummies to guide us. We're going to break down the key ideas and help you get a solid grasp on how those economies work. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. This transcript looks like a really great starting point to get those fundamental economic principles down. We'll be covering a lot from those foundational concepts, scarcity and specialization, all the way to those different economic systems operating out there.
Perfect. So, listener, get ready for a deep dive into how we make choices about using resources, especially when there's never enough to go around. We'll also be exploring the main types of economic systems and those powerful forces, things like supply and demand, that really make them tick. Now, the transcript starts by taking us way back, think hunter-gatherer societies. It really makes you think about how much things have changed, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's that shift to those settled communities where things get really interesting, though. That's when you start seeing that specialization, or what economists call the division of labor.
hmm
So instead of everyone, trying to do everything themselves, people can focus on specific tasks and get really, really good at them.
And that's where that hamburger example comes in, right? The source uses this analogy to explain the concept. It's just way more efficient to have a team of people each specializing in one part of the process, from raising the cattle to baking those buns, instead of one person trying to do it all.
Exactly. And that efficiency ties directly back to one of the most fundamental economic principles, scarcity. So resources, things like land, water, even time, they're all limited. Specialization helps us to get the most out of those limited resources to satisfy, well, pretty much unlimited wants and needs.
Okay, so specialization is a key ingredient in any economic system, it seems. But now let's get into those factors of production that the source breaks down: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. What are those all about?
Well, let's start with land. It might seem pretty straightforward, but it's actually more than just the physical ground. It includes any natural resources, so things like fertile soil, mineral deposits, forests, even clean air and water. Those are all considered land in economics.
And then there's labor. It's essentially that human effort that goes into making things. What I found interesting in the source was that discussion of different skill levels. You've got unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled labor. Makes you think about how technology is affecting those jobs that don't require specialized skills, right?
Yeah, it does. And that technology piece kind of brings us to capital, which can be a bit tricky. You've got financial capital, things like money, investments, and assets that companies use. But then there's human capital. That's the education, skills, and experience that workers bring to the table.
It makes you think about how investing in things like education can boost human capital, making people more productive and helping to drive innovation, right? And then you have that fourth factor, entrepreneurship. Those are the risk takers, the ones who come up with new ideas and try to bring them to life.
Yeah, and it's high stakes for sure. The source says that something like 90% of startups fail in that first year. But it's not just bad luck, right? Often those failures come down to things like poor planning, not understanding the market, or just running out of cash. But those who succeed can totally change the game. They create jobs, introduce amazing new products and services, and really push the economy forward.
Okay, so we've got those factors of production all at play in every economic system. But how those systems are structured, that's a whole other story. The source breaks down four main types: traditional, command, market, and mixed. Can we start with traditional economies? What makes those work?
Well, think about small, often rural communities where things are done the way they've always been done. Occupations like farming or crafts are often passed down through generations. Places like Haiti and lots of indigenous communities around the world still have strong traditional economic elements.
Then you've got command economies, where it's the government that runs the whole show. They control resources, set production targets, even determine those prices. The source uses North Korea and the former Soviet Union as those prime examples.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those command economies is that focus on central planning, right? It's
Yeah.
like a giant game of Tetris with the government trying to fit all the pieces of the economy together. Sometimes it works, but a lot of times it can lead to shortages and inefficiencies, even a lack of individual freedom in that market.
And then you've got the market economy, or free market capitalism, where it's like this invisible hand of the market guiding everything. Those forces of supply and demand, they determine what gets produced and how much things cost. The source even points out that there aren't any pure examples of this out in the world, but that idea of limited government intervention, that concept called laissez-faire economics, gets us pretty close.
Right. And that brings us to what's probably the most common system globally, the mixed economy. It's a blend of market elements with a bit of government intervention thrown in. Think about the US, China, even Russia. They all have those mixed economies, but tend to lean more toward either market or command principles, depending on their specific situations and priorities.
It's pretty fascinating how these different systems reflect each society's values and goals. Speaking of values, let's get into one of those core drivers of market economies: supply and demand. Sounds simple, but it can get pretty complicated.
The basic principle is this. When there's a lot of something and not a lot of people want it, the price goes down. But when something's scarce and everyone wants it, the price goes up. The source uses a good example, organic apples. If the supply is low and demand is high, those organic apples are going to cost you a lot.
And we can visualize this with those supply and demand curves, right? They show how the quantity supplied and demanded changes as the price changes. Where those curves intersect, you've got that equilibrium point. That's the spot where the quantity supplied matches the quantity demanded at a specific price.
But remember, it's not just price that affects supply and demand. The source talks about how things like people's incomes, their tastes, even changes in population, those can all influence how much people want to buy and how much those producers are willing to sell. Think about that shift from sedans to SUVs. That wasn't all about price. It reflected those changing preferences for larger vehicles.
And think about how demographics in a neighborhood can affect what you see in the local grocery store. Stores in areas with more diverse populations will stock a wider range of products to cater to different tastes. It's all about that constant back and forth of supply, trying to meet that ever-evolving demand.
And even with this market-driven system, things aren't always left to chance.
Mm.
The source goes into government intervention, and this is where it can get especially complex.
Yeah, because governments can try to influence the economy in a lot of ways. They can use taxes, set those regulations, and even put tariffs on goods coming from other countries. But the interesting thing is these interventions can have both positive and negative effects.
They can. The example of the cigarette sin tax is a good one. By making cigarettes more expensive, governments can discourage smoking, which has positive public health implications. But it also means smokers are paying more, and that can be a real burden, especially for those with lower incomes.
And then you've got that debate over minimum wage. It's designed to protect workers and try to ensure a livable income, but some argue it actually hurts those low-skilled workers by making it harder to find jobs. It's complicated.
And speaking of complicated, don't forget tariffs. Those are basically taxes on imported goods, and they can be used to protect domestic industries. The source even mentions Trump's steel tariffs, which were aimed at boosting the American steel industry. But tariffs often lead to higher prices for everyone. They could hurt other businesses that rely on steel and even make domestic producers less competitive in the long run.
Sounds like a lot for governments to juggle, trying to balance all those different interests and find the best way to promote a healthy economy, all without causing unintended consequences. But even without government intervention, there are those big forces at play that can impact everyone, like inflation and deflation. What exactly are those?
Well, inflation is basically when the prices of goods and services just keep going up over time. It's like the value of your money is shrinking, because it doesn't buy as much as it used to. Imagine how much more you could buy with a dollar 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. The source uses that diamond price analogy to explain inflation. A diamond used in like an industrial saw blade is way cheaper than a high-quality diamond in a piece of jewelry. It's that scarcity and desirability that drives up the price of that jewelry-grade diamond, similar to how limited supply and increased demand can lead to inflation for certain goods and services.
And a little bit of inflation isn't always a bad thing, right? It can actually be a sign of a healthy economy. The source even mentions that the Federal Reserve, which manages that U.S. money supply, actually aims for a 2–3% inflation rate each year because it encourages spending and investment. But if that inflation gets out of control, we're talking hyperinflation, that's when things get really scary.
Yeah, hyperinflation is like inflation on steroids. Prices skyrocket so fast that money becomes basically worthless. It can completely wipe out people's savings and create economic chaos. So inflation is about prices going up, but what about the opposite, deflation? That's when prices are falling. And it sounds like a good thing, but it can actually be a signal that something's wrong.
Exactly. Falling prices might sound good at first, but they can lead to a really dangerous cycle. Businesses start cutting production and wages, which further reduces that demand, which leads to even lower prices. It creates this downward spiral that can be really hard to break out of.
And deflation often comes along with declining consumer confidence. If people are worried about the economy, they're going to hold on tight to their money, which just makes the problem worse. Now, to wrap up this section, let's talk about those major economic downturns, recessions, and depressions. We hear those terms a lot, but what do they really mean?
Well, they both involve a significant decline in economic activity, but a recession is shorter, usually lasting a few months. A depression, though, can drag on for years, like that Great Depression of the 1930s. The source actually mentions 6 key economic indicators that help to identify a recession. Things like a drop in gross domestic product, GDP, which is total value of all goods and services produced in a country, a decline in manufacturing output, and rising unemployment. They all basically point to a shrinking economy.
And while those recessions are generally seen as a bad thing, the source does say they can have a silver lining. They can force those inefficient businesses to close, which makes way for new, more innovative companies to emerge.
It's like that forest fire analogy. Might be destructive at first, but by clearing out all that deadwood, it allows for new growth to happen. So while recessions can be pretty painful, they can sometimes be the catalyst for that much-needed economic shakeup and actually lead to long-term growth. The key is to learn from the mistakes that led to the downturn and find ways to build a more resilient and sustainable economy.
Okay, that was a lot of information packed into a short time. We've covered a lot of ground from those early hunter-gatherer societies to those complex economic systems we have today, from the forces of supply and demand to the challenges of wealth distribution and inequality. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is. And we've seen how these concepts play out in the real world, everything from the price of those organic apples to the impact of those government policies like steel tariffs. It's all interconnected.
Totally. But before we go too far, we want to leave you with something to think about. The world's always changing, and the economy's no different. What trends and challenges do you think are going to shape the global economy in those years to come? What role will technology keep playing? How will climate change and that limited resource availability? How will they impact economic growth? Those are some of the big questions economists are trying to figure out right now.
It's not just about economists figuring it out. It's about all of us joining in those conversations and working together to find solutions. The more people understand how the economy works, the better equipped we'll be to handle these challenges and build a more sustainable and fair future.
Exactly. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going. Understanding economics isn't just about managing your money. It's about being informed and engaged, being a citizen in a world that's becoming more and more complex and interconnected.
Exactly. How you understand economics shapes how you view everything, from government policies to global trade to the choices you make every single day.
It can feel overwhelming, but it's also kind of empowering. We've still got more to cover from your source material, so let's take a break here, and we'll come back in that next part of this deep dive with some more insights.
Let's do it. I think you'll find those examples really bring those concepts to life and show you how economics is playing out in your everyday life. So, we've covered some of those big picture concepts like economic systems and those forces at play in the market. But now let's kind of zoom in a bit and talk about wealth.
All right, so we're talking treasure chests now. But seriously, when we're talking about economics, wealth isn't just about, like, how much money you've got stashed away, right?
No, not at all. Wealth's a much broader idea. Think about all the assets of value that you own, like your house, investments, even those skills and knowledge which fall under that human capital thing we talked about.
Yeah.
It's about accumulating those things that have worth, whether you can physically hold it or if it's something like, expertise, that makes you valuable out there in the marketplace.
The source actually gives a formula for calculating wealth. It's the total market value of all your assets minus, well, any debts you might have. So it's not just what you own, but also what you owe, which makes sense, right?
Absolutely. And building wealth, both individually and as a society, it's a key driver of all that economic activity. When
Right.
people have more wealth, they tend to spend and invest more, which creates jobs, stimulates those businesses, and can even lead to more growth. It's like a positive feedback loop.
It sounds like a good loop to be in. But of course, we know wealth isn't always distributed evenly, which brings up that big issue of economic inequality.
Yeah, for sure. Economic inequality is definitely a complex issue, and there are no easy answers. But if we want to tackle this challenge and make a more equitable society, understanding how that wealth is created, measured, and distributed is crucial. It's not just about how big the pie is, but also, how it's sliced.
So, listener, think about how this connects back to you. What are your personal financial goals? Are you saving for a house, investing for retirement, maybe even dreaming about starting a business? Understanding these economic principles can really help you make those smarter decisions and achieve those financial goals.
And don't forget, The more you know about economics, the more empowered you become. Not just as a consumer making decisions about your own money, but also as a citizen who can participate in those conversations about the economic policies that affect your community, the world around you.
Okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive already, from those early hunter-gatherer societies to these complex economic systems, from supply and demand to the challenges of wealth distribution and inequality. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And we've seen how these concepts actually play out, from the price of organic apples to the impact of government policies like those steel tariffs. It's all connected.
It is. But before we wrap things up, we want to leave you with something to think about. The world's always changing, and the economy is no different. What trends and challenges do you think are going to shape that global economy in the coming years? What role will technology continue to play? How will climate change and that resource scarcity impact economic growth? Those are some big questions economists are grappling with.
And it's not just up to economists to figure it out. It's about all of us, engaging in those conversations and working together. The more people understand how the economy works, the better equipped we are to face these challenges and create a future that's more sustainable and equitable.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going. Understanding economics is more than just managing your money. It's about being an informed and engaged citizen in this increasingly complex and interconnected world.
Exactly. How you understand economics shapes how you see everything, from those government policies to global trade to the choices you make every single day.
It can feel kind of overwhelming, but it's also empowering. We've got more to cover from that source material, so let's jump back in. This episode has been about getting those basics down, and now we're ready to apply some of that knowledge to specific examples.
Yeah, let's do it. You'll see how these examples really bring those concepts to life and help you see how economics is happening in your everyday life.
All right, so we've kind of laid the groundwork with those big economic ideas. Now I'm ready to see how it all works in real life.
Well, the source material actually dives into this concept of opportunity cost, and it's a perfect example of how, economic thinking can be applied to our everyday choices.
Okay, yeah, remind me again, what is opportunity cost all about?
So basically, it's the idea that every decision you make means giving up something else. Resources are always limited, right? Whether we're talking about a government's budget or your personal finances. When you decide to use those resources on one thing, you're automatically giving up the chance to use them for something else.
Oh, right, yeah, like that classic guns and butter example.
Exactly. That model's a great way to visualize this. It shows how a government has to decide how much of its resources to spend on military, like those guns, versus social programs or infrastructure, the butter. The more they spend on guns, the less they have for butter, and vice versa.
So it's all about those trade-offs, right? Trying to find that balance between all those competing priorities, but with those limited resources. It's like a giant puzzle.
It is. And this idea isn't just for governments. It applies to us, too, in our daily lives. Think about it. Every time you buy that, fancy latte, you're giving up the chance to save that money for something else, maybe a concert ticket or a new book. Being aware of those opportunity costs can really help us make better decisions about how we spend our time and money.
That's a really good point. We make these choices all the time without even realizing it. Understanding that idea of opportunity cost can help us be more deliberate, make sure we're getting the most out of those limited resources we have.
Definitely. It's one of those fundamental economic principles that applies to everything from personal budgeting to those government policies.
All right, listeners, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive, but hopefully you're walking away with a better grasp on those core principles that drive economics. We started with those basic building blocks: scarcity, specialization, those factors of production. Then we explored all those different ways that societies organize their economies, from traditional to those market-driven systems.
And we dug into supply and demand, how those forces work together and how they're affected by things like government intervention, inflation, and even those big economic downturns, those recessions. It's a lot, but these are those key concepts that pretty much underlie everything happening in the economic world.
And remember, this is just the beginning of exploring this whole world of economics. There's always more to learn, and the more you understand, the better you'll be at making those financial decisions in your own life and just understanding those big economic issues that are shaping the world around us.
Exactly. And remember, economics isn't just about, numbers and graphs. It's about people making choices and how those choices affect our lives, our communities, and even the whole planet. So stay curious, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.